Today we're going to do midterm practice as well, which is pretty sweet. This is not complete. Because you guys don't actually have your midterm for 2 weeks, this is only partially done. I literally worked till midnight last night, so I spent all of Saturday building the lesson plan for today and half of Sunday building the lesson plan for today. And then I spent from Sunday at 2 o'clock till midnight doing this thing, and it's not complete. So this is basically just a midterm practice. We're going to do this later today, but you can see there's some parts missing. I've got nothing for functions and down, but I've got up to arrays. But that's fine. I'll just keep posting announcements that this has been updated. Or if you're checking my Git, you'll see it update. If you subscribe to my Git, you'll get little notifications telling you that new pushes have happened. That's probably the best way to do it, just subscribe to Git. But I will post an update when I update this code, which I'll be doing over the next few days. So this practice exam will work out. So that leads me to my segue about the midterm. So in 2 weeks, you guys have your midterm. Now, Monday is a family day, so have fun with your families, go be with your families. So you guys lose out on any midterms that would happen on Monday, right? Do you have other classes on Monday?
Yeah.
You do?
We just wrote our midterm.
Right, because they're doing it early. Yeah, and I thought about doing it early, but I want you to know the DOM first before we do the midterm, because that's like the perfect split point before we get into the other side of the DOM and advance, right? So this is like the perfect midpoint. So the way I see it, we'll just do it when you guys get back, which I'm totally cool with. So midterms in my class are a little bit different. At least this year they'll be different. In the past, I've used Blackboard, where you do like a half hour in Blackboard or an hour in Blackboard, and you answer, the Blackboard questions, and then you have a 2-hour practical. And the problem with that is I find that people, they do well in the first part, like in the Blackboard part, but then the practical tends to throw them off, and they had a lot of difficulty with the practical. So I changed that up, and I made it a 3-hour practical with steps. And I had 3 students complete in 45 minutes, and about 35 students run out of time. So I've changed that again, and plus a lot of cheating, like an insane amount of cheating. So much so that I couldn't even actually target them and pull them out and be because it would have been 3/4 of the class. So I was like, forget it. So this I've done a little differently. So what will happen is every single student will get a different test. You're going to log into an interface. You're going to provide your student ID and your email address into this interface. It's going to send you back a JWT, which will be a token that will go onto your browser. That will connect you to my server. My server will deliver you 20 questions, a 20-question test. Each question will be unique to the user. Doesn't matter who it is. So everybody will all have their own test. It's also smart. It detects copy and paste. And it detects when you leave the tab, which is fine. You're welcome to leave the tab and go look across the internet. But it also detects if 2 students leave the tab at the same time, and also if 2 students copy and paste at the same time. So it will know, and it will set a flag and then tell me that those 2 students copy and pasted at the same time. And oh, look, the code's exactly the same. So just keep that in mind. Anyways, the cool thing about that, though, is it allows you to go back and forth. There's no janky, crappy crap with Blackboard quitting on you or dying. The test can actually be done offline as well as online, so if you lose internet access, it's irrelevant, because once you gain internet access, it will pick back up again and send your answers off to the server. And the turnaround time for your marking will be within a few days versus weeks, right? Because instead of marking 82 tests, the server will be marking most of your tests and should do 90% of it for me. So I only have to mark about 10% of it. All right? The big thing is that at least then, if you study, you put the effort behind it, you fully earned that mark because the test is unique to you, right? So that means you've definitely earned your mark. Any questions about that? No? So that leads down to the point, what should you study? So this midterm practice test, which the link is already sitting on Blackboard for, is what you should use as your study guide, okay? Everything that we're going to be doing in the midterm will be on this midterm practice test. As long as you go through and turn this on and go through it. And this does randomized questions as well. So it will actually randomize these numbers. It will randomize some of the array structures, just give you a random result set. So you can do it multiple times and see, if you grasp what's going on. Go through that, 1 or 2 times with some friends, get used to it, and I guarantee you'll probably get 100% on that test, no issue. Like, totally, probably easy. There'll also be bonus questions on the test as well. I always do that, usually about 10 bonus questions in total, or 10 bonus marks, I should say. There's 10 possible bonus marks on top of whatever the marks that are there. So usually you can get anywhere from 100% to 110%, usually. All right, any questions? No? Cool. All right. Last week, let's take a look at last week. So that would have been module 5. We talked about the wonderful world of object inheritance. Probably a trippy too, I did say, tricky topic for many new people to JavaScript, because object inheritance in JavaScript is a little different than object inheritance in other languages, because it's not a class-based language, right? And in JavaScript, there's multiple ways to make objects and inherit them and create object constructors and stuff like that, which can definitely create a bit of confusion for new people. But what I recommend is definitely following the approaches that I talk about inside this lesson, because both approaches are the most common way for object inheritance to be done. So they're likely to be the way that you will see most often. Don't fall into the trap of using the ES5 classes, because the ES5 classes actually wrap object prototypes that I teach you in here. It's something known as syntactic sugar, which basically means it's an extra step for the interpreter, because it has to take that class, destructure it into object prototypal. It's opinionated on how it actually destructures that. You lose some efficiency, you lose some performance on it. So learning prototyping is definitely a better way to go versus using those classes, okay? That's why I don't teach the classes. Plus, the other thing I find too is some browsers don't support the class implementation yet, and that can make it a bit difficult to try to teach when so many people are using so many different types of browsers out there. So, however, next semester, not next semester because you guys are on co-op, the following semester in Node, we will be using classes quite often, actually. But that's a Node thing, and the server takes care of that, so it's irrelevant. We don't need to care about the browser at that point. All right, we also talked about passing by value versus passing by reference, and I included these 2 wonderful little graphs or pictures, diagrams, whatever. That's about the extent of my graphic design skills. Anyways, these 2 little graphics show, this one shows passing by passing by copy or value, where the value, when you try to assign the variable to another variable, the actual value sitting inside the variable gets copied over. That only happens with a certain type of value. Does anybody know what those types of values are called? There's a category for them. Yeah, primitives. So only the primitives will be copied by value. Anything like an array, an object, any object will be passed by copy. So that's arrays, functions, and objects themselves. All get passed by reference. Sorry, I don't know why I said copy. Passed by reference. However, just primitive values will be passed by copy, which creates a whole new memory address location and stores it in the memory address location. Then we did the little example. And then this one shows pass by reference, where when you assign the variable to another variable, it's actually creating an association to the memory address location, which means y is the same as x. They're identical at that point. They're both referencing the exact same value at all times. If the value changes, when you access it with y, you will get the exact same value as if you were to access it with x. There's no difference between those two, and that's passed by reference. Let's see. We looked at objects using, or inheritance using object literals, using object.create, right? Object.create allows us to be able to basically take the reference and assign the reference over to the new object, and then that creates that inheritance chain. We also talked about the fact that in JavaScript it is a chain, right? You can't have 2 parental objects feeding one child, right? The child can't inherit from two other objects. You're not able to do that in JavaScript. You're not able to do that in Java either. However, any of you who've used C++ know you can do that in some languages. However, so in JavaScript, it's a singular chain. So child can have one parent, that parent can have one grandparent can have a great-grandparent. That's kind of the way it works. If you want to do multiple types of inheritance is not the way to go. It's much better to use what? We talked briefly about it at the end of class. It's blank over inheritance. Starts with a C. Composition. Composition over inheritance. Composition is basically taking the traits that the object require and make it have those traits, right? So a dog can walk but barks, right? A human can walk but talks. So both dog and human can inherit the trait walk, but each one will receive its own version of barking and talking, right? We also talked about inheritance using object.create. We talked about inheritance using object constructors, right? That's probably the most complex way of creating object inheritance and tends to be the most confusing for most people. Let's see. You need to learn about proto and prototype in order to do it. But basically, it looks like this structure. So we have a person object that is our parent object. We want to create an employee child of person. We essentially have to call the person object inside. That will take all of the properties that are on the person object and assign them over, sorry, not assign them, but bind them to employee. And then we have to make employee's prototype equal to the person's prototype, which will take the reference of person and assign it off to employee. Yes, it's confusing. It doesn't matter how many times I explain it, read it, look at it. It's confusing to me as well. It is just a confusing concept. The idea is that this is the structure you're trying to create when you create inheritance that way. That's all you really need to note. And seeing as how it's open book, open internet, just keep track of this file, which, I mean, it's module 5. Just keep track of module 5, and you will do fine, as long as you have that code snippet carrying around. All right, we talked about composition over inheritance, which is basically inheritance is when you design your types. Your types would be your objects, right? Your data types around what they are, and composition is when you design your types around what they do. That is more just informational to those of you who like to expand your programming paradigm knowledge. It's not something that's going to be on a test, so you don't need to worry about that. I'm not going to ask you to create composition objects. Or composite, I guess, would be the proper term. Composite objects. Cool. Any questions about last week? No? Awesome. This week is super fun. This week, we're finally, after 5 weeks, we're finally into the thing that you're going to use client-side JavaScript the most for. And that is interacting with the DOM, which is your actual HTML page, right? So when you load up your browser and you go to that website, whatever your website might be, maybe it's Reddit, right? Or a Giphy, or whatever it is, Google, doesn't matter. That site, when it loads up, even this site right now that we're looking at right here, this structure that we see, the HTML page that loads in the background, automatically gets wrapped by the browser with something called the DOM. The DOM is a document object model. Essentially what it does is it takes a look at our HTML structure and it converts it into an object API that we can now interact with. The cool thing about that is it allows us to be able to select different things on the page, such as like the H1 heading you see at the top there, this H2 that's right here, even that little eye icon right there. We can select each of those little things, and then using JavaScript, we can modify them. We can modify their content inside. We can modify any properties that are attached to them, like the color, the text content, anything like that. We can also modify its position, where it's located on the page. We can move it to another location if we so choose to. But because it's a programming language, because JavaScript is a programming language, we can go even further and animate things. We can create interactive things with people so that when people click things, we can actually detect that, respond, in some way if we so choose. The DOM, understanding the DOM, is the first step to being able to work with your user in an interactive environment. That's the idea. So, in order to learn about the DOM, you had to know about objects, right? Because, I mean, it's in the term. Document, object, model, right? So, object was the first part we needed to understand because understanding objects allows us to understand the concept that objects have properties and methods attached to them. The DOM is no different. It has tons of properties, a ridiculous amount of properties. It also has a ridiculous amount of inheritance in it, right? The DOM literally connects you to every single element on the page, and every single element on the page is an object. Every piece of text on the page is a text node, which is an object. So everything there, understanding how objects are connected through inheritance and how objects work through reference, makes it a lot easier to understand what you're interacting with when you work with the DOM. So, simply put, the DOM is simply an object. It is no different than the objects you create in OOP. OOP stands for Object-Oriented Programming. The DOM represents our entire HTML page. It provides, like objects do, properties and methods that will allow us to create, read, update, and delete, better known as CRUD. Right? You guys have heard that term, I'm sure, CRUD. CRUD, various pieces of our HTML page. The DOM is not exclusive to JavaScript, though. The DOM is simply a standardized API that is accessible by other languages as well, right? So JavaScript is one language that you can use to access the DOM. VBScript, which you can actually code right directly in your browser, not sure if you knew that. VBScript can also interact with the DOM, but so can other languages. Other languages usually create wrapper libraries in order to interact with the DOM. So like PHP has the document object. Ruby has Nokoguri library, which will also interact with the DOM. C++ has a DOM library that you can load in as well to interact with the DOM. A lot of languages support DOM interaction. All right. Where was I? It first creates the document object and proceeds to populate it with the children nodes that represent the other HTML elements that you have on the page. So the document itself, if I type in document over here and make this a little bigger so that you can see what's going on. And I'm just going to drag this over. Cool. Hit enter. As you can see, like most objects, we get the object, we get the little fancy little, what do you call that, a carrot? I guess it's a carrot on the side. If you click the little carrot, you can see it spits out HTML page, right? And you can see these little arrows. The document, as you can see, is surrounding our HTML page from the word, or from the tag, I should say, HTML down. So it's literally the whole HTML nested page from the top to the bottom, okay? The document gives us a whole bunch of different API methods and properties to be able to interact with the different elements on the page. For example, selecting like the header or the body or different attributes that are already on those tags as well. And the DOM allows us to manipulate them if we so choose. So the first practice thing here is this one, practice one, a DOM manipulation example. As you can see, the first line of the practice, this is really, nope, wrong side. There we go, that should be a little easier to see. All right, on the left-hand side, you'll see I have an h1 variable that I've defined. And I've used a method on document known as the query selector. We're going to talk a little bit more about query selectors further down in the page here. But a query selector, simply put, selects an element on the page, right? Any element I want. In this scenario, I'm selecting the h1 element, right? The h1 element is literally this one up here. I'm selecting this element. Then, once I have it selected, I can go ahead and modify it. I can access the styles that are on the element and change their properties. So color is literally just a CSS style that's on there. There's also background color, there's font, there's everything that you can think of that's a CSS property is accessible through the style property. So you can dynamically modify these colors through the style property. And then I can also modify its text. So by accessing text content, I can change what that element currently says. So again, if you scroll up, it says introducing the DOM. Come down here, click execute, execute, and now it says hackety hack in pink. Nice, eh? Did anybody get my reference in the console there? Anybody watch Outer Limits?
Googled it and it came up right when I said recontrol. It came right up on my phone and triggered right out.
Outer Limits?
Yeah.
We control the horizontal and the vertical. All right. Outer Limits was a cool show back in the 90s. Actually, it came even before that. What's that?
I Googled and it said 1963.
That's the first version. There was another one that came out in the 90s that was pretty cool. If you have, are any of you taking the sci-fi optional credit or whatever?
Always go into it.
If you take that course, you get to watch an episode of Outer Limits. All right, so dot style is a property of the HTML element that the document actually returns back. Document.query selector will always return back an HTML element object. So when I say HTML element, there's no space in that. It's literally one word, HTML element. Okay? It actually returns back something before this. There's an object here that it returns, that it inherits from this, but this object is different based on whatever it is that you're selecting. So if you select an H1 element, it will likely be an HTML H1 object. If you select the body element, it will be an HTML body object, right? But all of them extend from the HTML element. An HTML element is what gives it access to things like the style property, the text content, values. Any of those type of methods and properties that are available come from the HTML element object. Don't worry, we have a table. Table kind of shows a little bit more information about it. So these are your various DOM types of the objects that are on the DOM. And they go kind of in the order that inheritance actually works. So let's pretend this is our HTML H1 element. Cool. It's going to inherit from the HTML element. The HTML element is going to inherit from element. Okay? Element should be inheriting from node. It comes from node. Node will inherit from the event target. And event target is going to inherit from the base object. The thing that everything inherits from will be the base object. So let's explain what each of these is. The HTML element interface or object represents any HTML element that is on the page. So think of all the HTML tags that are on the page. Every single one of those is an HTML element. So body is an HTML element, HTML is an HTML element, image, paragraph, span, div, article, header, whatever, all of them. All of them are HTML elements and will all be represented by this object. Okay? Element is a base class for DOM elements. It provides element level navigation. So essentially what element will do is it allows us to move up and down through our DOM. So when I start at the body, right, and I want to move down to any of the children inside the body, say like the header, or if I want to move to an H1, I can use methods that are on element, like next sibling, like parent node, children. There's tons of different methods that are available to move my way up and down through that DOM structure. Element is responsible for that navigation. Node is an abstract class that serves for the DOM nodes. It basically provides core functionalities such as parent node, next sibling, child nodes, and so on. They're basically the getters. Objects of node classes are never created, but they are concrete node classes that inherit from it, such as text nodes. That's the most often point where you'll see nodes is text nodes. Event target, Event target is where all the cool stuff happens, right? That's where all your click events get registered. That's where all of the hovers and mouse overs, mouse outs, focus, blur, any of those type of events that occur, they're all getting registered on the event target, okay? And then the node list is literally a collection of HTML objects. So it's literally a collection of these, almost like an array. You can kind of think of it like an array, and it's just a list of all of these that come back. Here's a little picture that kind of shows how the hierarchy works. We start with the event target at the top. That spreads out to our node, right? And our nodes can be various different things, elements, text, comments, right? Those are all nodes. Our element extends down into HTML elements or SVG elements or XML elements. There's a few different types. The only one we're ever going to concern ourselves with in this class is HTML elements, but be aware there are others. And then that extends down into the individual tag objects, right? So HTML anchor element would be what kind of tag? Yeah, an A tag. And HTML body would be a body, and then the input tag, right? So we can actually play with the DOM a little bit. If we execute this, holy smokes, there's a whole bunch of information here. So above, we are outputting the H1 tag we've selected from the DOM. If you click the icon beside the tag, you will see a list of properties available to it. However, if you remember from last week, inheritance can be seen through the proto property on this object. So scroll to the proto. So if you click execute on that, and it says this order is incorrect. Why is it saying the order is incorrect? That's interesting. Oh, right, because this is a little application. All right, so if you click on the body tag here, this list here is draggable. See how you can move it around? You can actually change the order of it. That took like an hour to build, by the way. So appreciate it. So anyways, what you're going to do is using the protos that you see here, you need to sort that list, go to each proto, and sort the list in the order of inheritance, right? So I'll give you a hint. The last proto, you can all move it down right now, is object. That's the last inheritance in the chain. So you need to work your way back up the chain. I'll give you a couple minutes there. Should take you no time to do it. So you're just clicking that little arrow, move down to the next proto, click the arrow, move down to the next proto, figure out what the next one is. I lost my styling on it though. They were nicely blue before. Now they just look like list items. Oh well. Whatevers. Whatevs. All right. Who wants to give me the first one? What's the first one?
Object.
Oh, that's at the bottom of the list. What's the first one at the top of the list? All right, so HTML element. Nope, body element, right? Cool. I can't move it up.
Yeah, actually, like over the word.
I think I have to move another one down. All right. So there's some jankiness to it. I apologize. But what do you want for free? All right. So what's next after the HTML body element? Yeah, HTML element. So we'll move that up here. And then next, right? After element, node. And then after node, event target. Click execute. And it should say passed at the top inside the beige diagram, if you got that correct. So that inheritance is important to understand because each one of these things has features available to you that allow you to interact with the DOM, right? So for example, element will allow you to interact with navigating up and down through the DOM tree. It's what's going to provide you with query selector and query selector all. Node is going to provide you with a way to access the parent node, the children nodes, any of those siblings, right? Because sometimes you need to access siblings. In fact, actually, I had to learn how to access siblings in order to do this, the drag and drop. So those type of things are all coming from element and node. The event target, without the event target, you cannot listen for events. There's no way for you to be able to listen to events. So the event target is essential, right? And then object, I mean, everything extends from object. We learned that about JavaScript. Every single object created all leads back down to object, right? Object is the root of all of it. It is the whatever you want to call at the end of the tree, right? Cool. Any questions about DOM types? No? It's not really something you're going to be quizzed on. It's more something you need to be aware of that exists and what each one is responsible for. So that way when you select, I don't know, say you try to call an event on a function. Well, you can't, right? Because it's not an HTML element object. So you can't call the event on it. So if you try to access, the query selector option on a variable, or you try to access an event, or perhaps you try to do parent sibling and it comes back saying there's a reference error, then you know that whatever it is that you're working with either isn't an HTML object element, or it's not an element, or it's not a node. You're missing some place in the chain, right? That's a good reason to be aware of inheritance. DOM selection methods. Literally the thing we need to know to select things around the DOM. Now, the one thing I don't talk about in this, but I know people are going to use because everybody uses them, and you should stop because there's no reason to use them. We're now in 2019, we're ES 2015, which has become pretty much the standard, is now 4 years old. These query selector options are supported back as far as IE8, which is pretty freaking far. There are 3 other ones, and I hate them. There is get element by ID. There's get elements by name. And then there's get elements by tag. Here's the reasons why I don't like them. This returns an HTML element, whatever. This does not. This returns an HTML, or no, it's a child list. Maybe it's a child list. I can't remember, but it's some weird friggin' object. We'll say child list. And then this returns a child list. Which means these 3 things return 2 different types of things based on my query. I don't want that. That's weird. Not to mention, I can't do a get element by a CSS selector. I don't get any power over what I select. Either I know the tag or I know the class, right? But that's really, sorry, class, not name. Why does that say class? Either I know the tag, I know the class, or I know the ID. I can't use CSS selectors to select what I'm looking for. These are not deprecated, but they will be deprecated at some point because the query selector methods we're going to talk about today are much more powerful and they're predictable. You know what you're going to get back every time. If I use query selector, I always get back an HTML element. Unless it's not there, then I'll get back null, right? If I use query selector all, I always get back a node list. I don't get anything else. I always get a node list. So they're predictable. I know exactly what I'm going to get back despite what CSS I put in it. Now you might be like, well, really is that important? It is, because when you become more advanced in programming, you're going to be doing a lot of things dynamically. You're going to be taking information from third-party sources and using that in order to select elements from your DOM. Because of that, you don't know what these 3 things you need at that particular point, which means now you've got to perform other logic. You have to actually start evaluating what it is in order to figure out which one you're going to use. Like, that's a headache. It's just terrible programming, right? Just forget that. So use query selector and query selector all. I say it, but I know I'm going to see these 3 things on the test. I always do. People always use them. Just avoid it. They're terrible, terrible things. Just use query selector and query selector all. All right, so the DOM API provides several methods for selecting HTML elements, blah, 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 plus query selectors. HTML elements are tags, right, that make up your HTML document. You guys took HTML. Anybody not take HTML in this class? That's good. That would be alarming. So they're the tags that make up your document, right? They're XML, essentially. Not sure if you knew this. You guys have already coded in XML, even if you didn't realize you had. The second you wrote HTML, you wrote XML. HTML is an XML-based language, right? It's just tags. That's what wraps and gives semantic value to your code. That XML basically describes to the browser what your information in your document actually means. And now that we have HTML5 with semantic tags, you can provide even more information to the browser about what your content is. You know, this is an article, this is a header, this is my navigation, stuff like that. You can give a lot more value to what you're writing. So you've already written XML before. What the DOM API is going to do with this, it's going to take all these wonderful tags and it's going to convert them essentially into an object. So we have HTML, bloop, bloop, and then under that we might have body, bloop, bloop, and under body we might have a div, bloop, bloop. See what's happening here? We're creating an object of keys. That's what the DOM is basically doing. It creates this wonderful object of inherited items and creates this node tree, basically, so that you can move your way up and down through your actual HTML, right? So the cool thing is you've already used something that does that basically walks up and down through the DOM. Maybe you didn't realize that you were doing it, and this is another language that actually takes advantage of the DOM API, and that is CSS. Anybody in here never coded CSS before? Cool, that's awesome. CSS takes advantage of that DOM API, same as JavaScript, same as VBScript in the front end. They're all taking advantage of that DOM API. CSS, when you actually create a CSS selector, that CSS selector accesses the DOM API and crawls up and down through the DOM using your CSS selector to be able to figure out which element it is that you're talking about. When you apply a style to it, it's not calling JavaScript in the background, but it might as well be. It is setting the property of whatever that DOM element is to whatever it is you want to set it to. The background color, the color, whatever it is that you're doing to whatever value it is that you're passing to it. So that's kind of like a more under the hood explanation of what CSS is doing for you. But the cool thing about CSS is we can actually use those selectors that you guys already know in order to access HTML elements and use them in our JavaScript, right? All you need to know is what the selector looks like. So let's scroll down a little bit. So here's an example of selecting elements using CSS selectors. Here's the first one. We're going to talk about query selector first. Query selector always returns back this. I don't have it written down anymore. HTML elements. This guy here. Query selector will always return back an HTML element. Okay, or a child of the HTML element, I should say. So const p equals document.querySelector p. That p is just a CSS selector, right? It's a tag selector. What am I looking for with that selector? Exactly, I'm looking for a paragraph, right? So document.querySelector is going to select a paragraph. Now the next question you should be asking yourself is which paragraph? How does it know which paragraph to choose? It doesn't care. It's going to move recursively through the DOM till it finds a paragraph, and then you're getting that one. You get the first instance it finds. It's not going to keep moving its way through the DOM to find every single one and return you the last one or the middle one or some random one. You will always get the first instance of that particular tag, okay? Next one, const content equals document.querySelector.content. What is that selecting? Selecting the first instance of what with a what. First HTML element that has a what?
Class.
Yep,
Content.
that's right. Has a class called content. The second it finds an element, doesn't matter what that element is, could be a div, could be a paragraph, could be an image, could be a text area, it doesn't matter. It's going to return it back to us the first instance it finds. The next one Might be a little bizarre. Some teachers show you guys how to do attribute selectors. Some don't. Attribute selectors, stupid powerful and very handy to know how to do. This is an attribute selector. You can also write attribute selectors with values, which is pretty cool. You can also pass in wildcards into attribute selectors. So if you know what the tag starts with, but you're not sure what it ends with, you can actually pass a wildcard into it. This is just basic CSS, by the way. This is an attribute selector. So let's do data, right? Data is a common one that you'll see. And we'll give it a value. My value, bam, wrap it in single quotes. Cool. Let's pass in block. Cool. I mean, we don't usually write things backwards, but whatever. Query select your, pretend that says selector, and document, right? This is our selector. It's going to return back the first instance of any element that contains a data attribute that has the value of my value. That's CSS. You can do that in CSS as well, right? That's not limited to JavaScript. That's CSS. All of these are CSS. What about number 5 here? The M6P1 variable. What tag or what element am I looking for? I'm looking for any element that contains a what? An ID of that ID, right? Yeah. Hashtag M6P1. Sounds like a Kardashian hashtag, right? Hashtag M6P1. All right. So that's going to return back any element that immediately matches that tag and return that instantly. Now, some people will argue that get element by ID makes sense, right? Because you can only have one of those IDs on the page, and you should only ever have one of those IDs on the page, so it should only ever return one ID. It makes sense. I argue that developers, as much as we want to be super powerful people that don't make mistakes, we sometimes make mistakes. And we might put 2 elements on the page with the same ID. That can happen, right? You don't want to do that. Either way, query selector should only ever return a single element. When I only want one element, I don't want the potential chance of there being multiple elements coming back. I only want one element. Query selector will only ever return one element, one HTML element, right? So I know exactly what instance of, what data type I'm getting back. I don't have to worry about it. It's predictable. All right, so down here, this is how we get multiples back, right? Because selecting one at a time would be very tedious and nearly impossible, though you can actually start at a cursor point and move ahead if you wanted to, but that's a bit more advanced. This will actually return back all elements that match a search. So const ps equals document.querySelector all p will literally select every single paragraph that is in your HTML document and return it back to you as a node list, right? Which is essentially, it is not the same as an array, but it is very similar to an array of HTML elements, okay? Const contents equals document.querySelector all.content. What's that going to return for me? Literally any element that contains the class content, right? And then const links equals document.querySelector all is going to return any element that contains the href attribute. As long as it has a href in it, I'm getting it back. So that will also include meta tags. That include, what else has hrefs? Pretty much just meta tags. I can't think of anything else off the top of my head. Links also, like the link tag that's in the header sometimes will also return. And anchors, obviously, right? So we'll get all those back. So it doesn't make sense to get all the IDs by the IDs, so I didn't include that in my query selector all, because we should be decent programmers and not be coding the same ID on multiple elements. They should all have unique IDs, hence the point of ID, right? Identifier, that's meant to be unique. If you click execute, it's just going to spit out this laundry list of console items so you can kind of see what's happening here. And you should get a pass at the top. Nice and easy practice. All right. We haven't talked about this up to this point, Some of you probably already know how to do this, but it is an important tool to you as JavaScript programmers, as any web-based programming that you might do. This is a very, very important thing to know. How to inspect an element on the page. All the major browsers provide a way to inspect an element. If you're using a browser that does not, you need to change that browser over to one that does. Okay? That's super, super important. Otherwise, your life will be very difficult as a developer. So you simply, in order to see what the element is, you simply right-click on the element it is that you want to inspect. And then you click Inspect. And in the developer's window, this thing on the right here that we've been working in, this is called the developer's window. In the developer's window, it will show you the HTML element, allowing you to quickly see what tag it is and what attributes it actually contains, and also any children that might be nested within the element. So here I've given you an element, right? On first glance, you may think this is what type of tag? On a first glance, a button? Yeah. Yeah. So right click on it because I can tell you with confidence it's not a button.
I didn't think it was. I thought it was a trick.
What is it? It's an input tag. Actually, you can click in it and change the word. I tricked you. So I know it's a button, right? So I know it's an input with the button attributes on it. I can see that it's going to do things, right? If I click on it, it's going to prevent the default. That's important, right? Because I don't want things to happen when you click on it. The value is currently set to howdy. I can see that. I can see it also has a data attribute, right? But those data attributes are actually being provided not by me. They're being provided by one of the extensions I have, better known as 1Password. It's just adding its own data attributes to the actual element. All right, so answer the questions below. What HTML tag is the howdy button? Yeah, it's an input. And what is the value of the name attribute? So look at the attributes that are in the list. Yeah, this is button. This is button. Make sure you put it all together. Make sure you write it exactly as you see it. Otherwise, the code will say no. If you click execute, it should say passed. Out of curiosity, how many already knew about the inspect? Awesome. That's great. I mean, you took HTML. Did you guys have Scott? Yeah, it'd be like week 1, he'd show you the inspect. It's like his go-to thing. And it's the most powerful tool. Not to mention, it's really good when you're trying to do styling with CSS because your styles show up down here. You can actually see the styles for the howdy button down here, and I can click these. So if I click that, you can see now my cursor is just a regular index cursor. You can see the box shadow. I can turn that off. I can turn off blue, the background color, and the border colors. Right? You can go through here and actually see how these colors are affecting your particular object, and you can work with them interactively. I used to work with a junior developer, and that was like his go-to. He would sit there with the boss would be like, okay, move that element by 2 pixels, do this, do that, and he would do it just inside here, and then when he was done, he'd copy the CSS out and splat it into the CSS file. Made his life so much easier. All right. Let's move down. So CSS gives us the ability to do something called DOM walking. DOM walking is extremely important, right? DOM walking is how we move through the DOM. Because often, when we're going through the DOM, we might be at one particular location in the DOM, but want to be somewhere else. So for example, if I have a body, and inside my body I have a header, and inside the header I have an H1, an H2, and a paragraph tag, right? And I want this element here, the H2. I can write a selector that goes body, right? The little arrow thing that says next child, header, right? That'll return all headers at that level within body, but I want the H2. So I'm going to go, there's a few different ways I can do this. I could do H1 plus H2, which will grab any H2s that are a sibling of H1. That's what that basically means. All of this is just CSS. That's all it is. It's DOM walking with CSS. Like, if I really wanted to be super lazy, I can remove 90% of that. There we go. Right? I just give me a body, give me all the headers in the body that contain an H2 element. Right? So I'll get back all those H2s. But they have to be in that cascade in order for me to get it. Well, in JavaScript, that's super handy, being able to actually DOM walk. We're going to do this DOM walk, and then we're going to take a small break. So because our query is merely a CSS selector, we can walk the DOM just like we would when we're targeting a nested item. In fact, we can utilize the entire possible power of CSS, so not just DOM walking, but also pseudo selectors, right? You guys did a little bit of pseudo selectors? So like nth child of type, those ones, after, before. Really? That sucks. Learn pseudo selectors. They're super powerful. It'll make your lives a lot easier when you're doing CSS. Anyways, you can use those in JavaScript with the query selector. It does support pseudo selectors. So let's do this little practice. So here, I'll let you guys do this on your own. Let's challenge. You're going to need a pseudo selector, so you're going to have to go look it up. All right, look up. You know what? I'll give it to you. I'll be nice. I'll give you the word you're looking for, but to get it to do what you want, you're going to have to look it up. All right. Step 1. Write the CSS selection string that will select only the even. See how it says even? I haven't wrote it down. Even. That will only select the even elements. Hint, you will likely need to inspect to see what you're working with first. I mean, it's very likely a list. It's a list. I'm not joking around. Hint, you will likely need to inspect it, right? Did that? So the first one, you're going to need to store the selector as a string. So come up with the CSS selector and store it in there as a string. I've already done the rest of the code for you. All you need to do is come up with the selector that will actually select those elements for you. I mean, what tag is wrapping all those elements right now? What tag is that? Yeah, it's an unordered list, right? It's a UL. And all those elements inside there are what tags? Yep, they're LIs. And I think there's even something on there that'll make it even easier. I'm not sure. Nope, they're just blank old LIs. But this thing here will allow you to select only the even elements. Cool. Anybody ready? No? Anybody want a hint at what nth child takes? Yeah? So you can pass nth child different things, but the most common things you're going to pass is either even or odd. You can pass it even or odd. If you pass it even, it will take even child. That help you, Noah? Did you get it? Really, I'm just stalling for time because we're going kind of fast. No, I'm just kidding. All right, let's write this selector, okay? We'll just break it down. So, obviously, let's start with the parent. What parent do I need? Yep, the UL, right? Let's start with the UL, okay? And I mean, let's be CSS ninjas. I want only the LI tags that are children of the UL, direct children. So let's put that wonderful little great arrow in there. That will select the LIs that are all just children directly of the UL tag. LI, right? But I want to filter my LIs. I'm going to use a wonderful pseudo selector in order to do that. The pseudo selector, I use the colon to indicate to the CSS interpreter that I'm using a pseudo selector. It's nth child, and it's actually like a method almost. And inside it, you can either write odd or even. I'm going to write even, like so.
Is that kind of like a for loop or for each loop, I guess?
Nth child, I believe, under the hood probably commits a for loop. Yeah. It does. It definitely acts like an iterator. And you can do some cool things because nth child, instead of using even, you can actually pass it an algorithm. And you can select, like Scott usually does that when you guys, do you guys get advanced HTML and CSS? Do you get that course? Probably
I
not.
don't think so.
Yeah, probably not. In the advanced one of his favorite things that he likes to do is I want you to select every third element and then style it. And that's what you need. You need that thing and you pass it n plus 1, or no, n plus 3, and it will select every third element. It's really annoying, but yeah, it's cool. I mean, everybody likes making Scott happy. He's a happy fellow. All right, if you clicked it, all the even ones should be blue. Interestingly enough, it won't say passed.
Yeah, it's constantly getting an error.
Your selector isn't correct. You should have selected 3 elements. I did. All right, just ignore that. It doesn't matter. I've kind of stopped. No, I'm not going to tell you that. Actually, never mind. Scratch that. CSS DOM walking is a simple way for us to select elements nested deep within our DOM structure. It is also a way for us to use our CSS ninja skills, right, to access that hard-to-reach element. However, CSS DOM walking is not what we're limited to. JavaScript supports scoped walking. So remember how I told you, document, right? Document wraps our whole HTML page, right? So you can think of it as being above here, right? Document is an instance of element. Element, this object, element, has 2 methods that you're already using. Query selector, and I'm going to be super lazy, query selector all, right? Supports both methods, which means this is an element, so it has access to query selector all and query selector. This is an element, so it also has access to query selector and query selector all. So does header, so does h1, so does h2, so does paragraph. The way query selector works is it works inside the scope it currently is contained in. So when you call query selector on document, it scours the entire HTML page looking for the tag that you're asking for. However, if you call it on body, it will only look within the body tag. If you call it on header, I'm sure you can see where I'm going with this, it will only look within the header tag, which means if you were to select back header and then ask for the H2, it will only look for the H2 within that header, right? Same with H1. If you call it on H1, it will only look through the children of H1. Pretty easy.
So I write that as h1.query. Do that as selector?
If you stored your thing as H1, yes. Not with the way you're thinking. So here's where the problem lies. Document is available to you right off the bat. It's already been created for you by the browser's API and stored in this wonderful keyword. This is just a variable, really. You just don't have control to change. Well, you can change it. Don't change your document. You can overwrite the document object. You can make a document equals null and completely F your whole page. That is possible. But H1 doesn't exist because it's not a keyword. So what you would have to do is let H1, right, equal document dot, I'm just going to write QS just to be super lazy. You know what I'm writing, all right? And then pass it H1. That'll return an H1 element and store it into there. Now I can do H1 dot query selector, whatever it is that I want to grab. Incidentally, we don't use let with HTML elements. Yeah, do you know why?
Because they're not supposed to change.
Exactly. they're not only not supposed to, you shouldn't change them. If you change the H1 and make it equal to something else, you've lost your reference to the object. You no longer have access to that reference. So if you make H1 now equal to null, we are no longer accessing this anymore. We're now accessing null, right? Which is a primitive and there's just no point. So you don't ever want to change that. To stop people from changing those values, we write const. That means this stays the reference because the reference is not going to change. The DOM is never going to change that reference. It can't. It physically can't, right? When the page loads, that's when the DOM gets created. This H1 reference that we have that gets returned to us exists whether we like it or not. It always exists. It never changes, and there's no way for you to physically change it, right? Because it's a part of your DOM structure. You can't change it. So make it const, right? Const also is a little bit more efficient because it allocates the exact appropriate amount of memory for the actual particular thing that you're working with. And because we're working with a memory address, that's 4 bytes of memory. That's a very small amount of memory, right? Const is definitely better. Let leaves it wide open to you because it doesn't know what you're going to store in there. And because we're dealing with a dynamic language, it's not going to allocate a specific amount of memory, which means it's less efficient. Not much. Like I imagine the benchmark would be microseconds behind each other, but you're all looking at me super glazed. I just totally nerded way out, sorry. Anyways, you get my point. Okay, let's take a bit of a break before we actually do the DOM walk. Let's take 15 minutes, probably the only break we'll take tonight, and then we'll power through everything else and try to get out a bit earlier when that's like, yes, please. All right, let's take 15 minutes, meet back here at 7:20. I mean, it's a little disheartening just for the fact that it takes me like 16 hours to put one of these together, and we basically kill it in like an hour and a half. It's kind of like, you know, when you spend all that time making a cake and then people destroy it in 30 seconds. Yeah, same idea. All right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, it totally pays off in the end, just not the first time. Yeah, I make less than minimum wage. All right. All right, so let's talk about DOM walking with the scope. I kind of alluded to it a little bit before you guys went on your break. Basically, the idea is that whatever HTML element you select back, starting at that particular point, you can do searches through its children, right? So if you select back a header element, then you can now start to search through the children of that header element if you want to. So the document object translates our entire page into a collection of HTML elements. We already understand that part. The document object itself inherits from the node object, right? Which provides us with the methods query selector and query selector all. It's what gives us those wonderful, powerful methods that we need to use. All HTML elements also inherit from the node object, which your Sherlock deducing skills should tell you that all HTML elements have access to the methods query selector and query selector all. It just scopes it to their particular level in the hierarchy. So what exactly does this mean? Query selector and query selector all are methods wrapping search algorithms. The object they're called on is their scope. That means if we select an entire HTML element, then call query selector or query selector all, it will look for HTML elements matching the past CSS selector within the scope of that particular element. Obviously, an example definitely makes it easier to see what's happening. Let's load this up. All right. So first, we're going to select and store only the UL element. So you're going to need to do two things here. One, you're going to want to inspect the element because there's multiple UL elements on the page. You only want that one. You don't want every single UL element on the page. So step one for you should be to right-click, choose inspect, right? I'm just going to lower this so you can kind of see what's going on over here. Now, when you right-click and inspect, very likely it's going to have highlighted an LI, right? So obviously, if you want to see the parent, you need to scroll up through the DOM. So just scroll up till you get to the UL. And what should I use so I can grab only that UL and not every UL on the page? What would be the best CSS selector? Yes, the ID. Exactly, the ID. So let's use that. So we're going to write our document query here. So equals document, right? And the reason why I'm starting at document and I'm not selecting another one is because at some point I have to select at least one element. I have to start at document. At the very minimum, I have to start at document. There's no body. There's no H1. There's no any of those. Those don't exist yet. We only have document. That's the only one that's been predefined for us. So we're going to do query selector, right? And in this, I'm going to pass, inside the query selector, I'm going to pass my selector, which will be the ID, right? Which is sorry, need to give a hashtag, M6P6SR. I'll write that down. No, it is right in front of you. M6, which stands for Module 6. P6, which stands for Practice 6. SR, which stands for Student Response. Just in case you were curious.
You actually recognize your IDs.
What's that?
I think I have my IDs randomly. Like just
I do have I have a UUID method that's attached to my library that will generate a UUID, a unique ID whenever I need one. And you can set the size as well, which is kind of cool. All right, cool. So that should give us back our UL element if we did that correctly. The next thing is using scope, select and store only the dot labels. That dot is not a misspelling. That dot obviously represents what type of selector. Exactly, it's a class selector. So the dot is not a mistake. So we're going to say equals, and I'm using scope. So what's cool is I can start in UL, right? Now that I have the UL, I can start right there. Dot query selector. Now I'm selecting more than one. So which one am I using? Query selector or query selector all? Exactly. I mean, it's in the title, right? And then we're going to pass dot label to it. I believe that's what the class is. Yeah, it's a span actually. We're storing the spans. I thought we were storing the LIs, but we're storing the spans. Using scope, we're going to do it again. Using scope, select and store only the spans with the first class. So equals document. Nope, not using document. We're using scope. UL dot query selector all, right? Because we're choosing more than one. And what does this one look like? The first class. I gotta find one. I think I'm in the wrong spot. I think it's dot first class, like that. Whoops, don't hit save. Force a habit when I'm in an IDE to hit Command S.
I almost did it a couple times.
I mean, it's a damn good habit to get into. But, yeah, causes problems in the browser. All right, click execute. If you did it correctly, it should say pass. Plus, if you scroll up, it turns the little things blue. Not very well, by the way. I mean, that was really anticlimactic, but whatever. I think I missed my style sheet. I had a style sheet that made things look a little nicer, but I think I forgot to copy it over. When I build these things, I don't build them in actual raw HTML. I use something called Haml, which is like a templating language. And I have this thing on the back that's known as a Sinatra application. And I build everything in Sinatra. And then I export it out all as HTML. But sometimes I forget to export certain things like style sheets and stuff. All right. Cool. So that's how we would select using scope, right? Let's talk about actually working with these items. So working with an HTML element. I mean, it's fine to select an HTML element, but it doesn't really mean a lot unless you're actually going to do something with it. It, at the end of the day, is just an HTML element. It doesn't hold any bearing. The whole purpose of why we use DOM selectors is so that we can manipulate and change those things or even just capture data out of them. Like in your assignments, for example, you're going to need a DOM selector in order to capture the data out of the input field that the user types input into, right? You're going to need DOM selectors in order to access the button, because the button, you're going to need it in order to bind a click event to it, though I think I do all that for you. But you're also going to need document selectors to access the score element that's on the page and access the guess limit that's on the page as well. Those are elements that are on the page that you need to access and gain control over. So these DOM selectors are exactly how you're going to do that. So once you actually do those, you're going to get back an HTML element. And HTML elements have several different types of properties and styles, properties and methods and stuff attached to them. But the ones that are fairly common that you're going to use, especially when you're attempting to change content, are text content, which will be attached to all normal text kind of based HTML elements like paragraphs, divs, labels, H1s, things like that. And values. Values tend to be associated with form inputs, right? So if it's an input field or a text area or a radio button or something like that, the value is the actual value that you would submit to wherever your form is going to get submitted to. It's not the text content that's different. So sometimes it's one or the other. So of course I created a demonstration of it. And again, that stupid phrase, falcon flies south in the winter. And then falcons suck, right? So in this, I'm selecting the hashtag falcon, which is that query, or sorry, is this text you see right here. That's the hashtag falcon. And then in the next line, I'm selecting this input field, right? Notice the selectors don't change. They're exactly the same type of selector. I'm using the IDs as the identifier in order to choose the particular HTML element I want to select. Once I have these things, if I want to change what they are, all I have to do is access text content to change the value of the falcon flies south in the winter to something else, and the falcon input.value. If you access these like this, what will happen is it will return the current value inside of it. Okay? These are just properties, like any other property. Remember this property? Right? You remember that property? That is no different. Text content is literally the same as just doing that. It's no different. There's no difference between those two ideas. If I want to make this equal to Sean, what symbol do I need following it? Equal sign. Yeah, exactly. And then Sean. Right? Same thing with this. If I want to change the text content inside here, all I need to do is falcon p access that property, text content, and then make it equal to vault. I don't know what I was writing. Just make it equal to something, right? That changes whatever content is currently in there. What if you want to append? What if you want to append new content on? What do you think you would do to append content?
Plus equals.
Exactly, just plus equals. What if you want to make it on a new line? Does anybody know that little symbol?
\n.
Yeah, \n, right? \n. That'll put a new line character into it for you. And then now it will be down to the bottom line, right? But you're not limited to text content. There's also .inner HTML, which you can actually paste HTML directly in there if you wanted to. And it will parse it and put it into the page. And then there's also .value. .value is available on every HTML element, but some elements it doesn't even really make sense, right? Like, you don't need a value on a div, because you're never going to pass a div off to a server. That's not a thing, right? You're only going to pass form elements, but value is available on every single form element that are there, okay? All right, so these two things, if you hit execute, you will see the content. So console log.falcon ptext content. Sure enough, it spits out the falcon flies south for the winter, right? And then if you spit out the falcon input.value, it says the falcons suck. All right. Now, if I want to change that content, like I just said, all we have to do is access falcon p dot text content, right? Because that's the property I want to access, equals, Burakacha. There you go. It's a tough word to spell. Try to zoom in a little bit for you because I think it's kind of difficult to see. I'm definitely not in the right area. There we go. Now I'm in the right area. Okay. And then if I wanted to change the input, so if I show you what that looks like, so if you click execute and scroll up, you'll see that your word has changed to whatever your phrase was that you typed in there. Now if I want to change the input, I will just do Falcon input dot value equals 5. And then if I click execute, I get 5. Now, this allows me to segue into something. All inputs, unless you are using Node, right? Unless your front end is React and your back end is Node, or your front end is Angular, Backbone, Ember, Express, whatever it is that you're using on the front, sorry, not Express, Vue, and your back end is Node, Express, Mongo, and everything is JavaScript. Both sides are JavaScript. All information that comes from the user comes back as a string. All information from the user, I'm going to repeat that, comes back as a string. Which means if I'm taking a number from the user and I want to compare it against another number, or I want to use it as a numerical value, what do I need to do to it first? What's that? Cast it. Parse it or cast it. Either parse int or a number all wrapped around it. That is super important. Otherwise, when I go to make a comparison, like say, oh, I don't know, current guess equals input, right? That old adage. When I make that comparison to those two things, that is going to return what? False. Why is it going to return false? Because input is not a number, right? So we need to make sure we wrap it. So I can show you that I'm not crazy. I'm going to say console.log type of. Type of is an operator built into JavaScript that will actually tell you the type of the thing that you're looking at. Falcon input dot value. And if I hit execute, you can see it is a string, right? If I wrap it in a number, well, it's very obvious what's going to happen. If I could type and stop having a stroke. Go, execute, and it's number, right? So it's very important to understand that all user input comes back as a string. Same thing happens in PHP as well, but PHP doesn't have a plus sign as a concatenator, so you get away with a little bit more leniency. But just keep that in mind when you're working with inputs from users. The whole thing changes when you start working with Node servers and stuff like that, and everything's JavaScript on both sides. Changes a little. Okay, any questions about text content or dot value? No? Pretty easy stuff, right? Like working with the DOM is not really that difficult. I mean, we're just touching the surface. When we get into events, events are so cool. You can do so many crazy things. Actually, when we do the event lesson, we'll build Simon Says with like the little remember button thing. It's really annoying. It's so annoying, but I love it. Because it's nothing better than 30 computers emitting really obnoxious tones. Right? All right. Changing styles. So, text content and the value, that's minimal, right? What do we want to change? Some graphic text, right, on the page. You know, like the color, the background color, the width, the height of an element. Think of all the things you can affect that are CSS properties. Think of all those things that you have control over, and now you have control over them with a programming language, where you can actually dynamically increment them, right? You can pass it through a while loop and animate something moving across a page if you wanted to, because you can control those particular pieces. Like I said before, we control the horizontal and the vertical. Literally anything on the page you can programmatically control, okay? So HTML elements have several properties. For example, you can change any of their attributes, right? So ID, name, source, href, all those attributes are just a dot ID away, a dot href away, a dot source away from the HTML element that you retrieve. The best part is we're not limited there. We can also access the style property. However, the style property comes back with some bonus capabilities because the style property is actually a reference to an object that contains all of the CSS properties that you would want to affect on that particular HTML element. All that comes back. So by accessing those attributes, we can dynamically modify them. So I have this little thing up here that says style me. And we want to access the above element. Now you're on your own. Using document.querySelector, access that element. You will likely need the inspector to be able to tell what it is. Right? Go ahead and access that element. Remember, it's only one element, so which selection method do you want to use? Yeah, just query selector, right? Because you're only selecting one of them. If you use query selector all, you'll hit a nice, nasty surprise where it's a lot harder to modify the property. Hashtag styling.
Serious often it's document query selector and the other time it's UL.
No, that's not how that works.
No,
It's always document.querySelector, but when we store a UL into a variable, we can now go variable.querySelector. Alrighty. Who wants to walk me through this? What's my first piece of syntax I need? So now you want to help me out? No? Okay. Ben, yeah, document. Document dot query selector. Hashtag styling. Is it styling or styling? There's no G?
Oh, wait, there's
Oh, there's a G. That does totally seem like me, though. Yeah, that totally seems like something I would do. It's the Gen Xer in me. Hence why I swear so much. All right, so hopefully we have back our style me property, right? And if you want to know for sure, I mean, that's why we learned how to use console, right? Let's do console.log right underneath it. Type in style me right below it. Go ahead and click that little execute. Execute, and it should spit out the HTML. Now, if you're using Chrome, you won't if you're using Chrome, you will get this. If you're using Firefox, you won't get that. You'll get a hashtag item with an arrow beside it. If you're using Opera, I have no idea. If you're using Edge, I have no idea. I don't touch those browsers. But if you're using Chrome or Firefox, you'll get this. Not in Firefox, sorry. If you don't want that, and you want the little arrow interactive kind of thing, just change log to dir, hit execute, and you'll get the little interactive thing. Now you can click on it and see all the stuff that's inside of it. And last, let's change this back to log. If you want to know what style me is, if you want to know that it is an HTML element, there's a couple ways we can do this. We can do .constructor, .name, so constructor would be the thing that it came from. And if you click execute, it will tell you it's an HTML div element. Okay, that's one way. The other way, we can use the instance of operator and make a comparison to an object. So I'm going to say style me. Are you an instance of HTML element? Are you a part of this? And click execute, and that is true. It is. Now keep in mind, it will literally travel through the whole chain. Are you an instance of element? True. Are you an instance of node? Obviously the answer is true. And are you an instance of object? And everybody should know that that's always true, right? All objects should be instances of object. So that's something you can also do to be able to tell. I mean, this is why you come to class. You get these little things that are not a part of the notes, right? Okay, so if everything is working correctly, we did click execute like about 150 times. You should see style me surrounded by a border. That's the property I provided to you. I gave you a property. Now it's your turn to play. Go through step 2, step 3, and step 4, and change those properties. You can use my example here. So you are definitely going to need .style, right? So style me dot style. You have to start with that, okay? Style is an object with properties on it, so you're going to do a dot and then whatever it is that you require there. If you want to know what the properties are that style has, what you can do is type in console.log style me dot style, right? Hit execute, and there's all of the properties it currently contains. That is the most horrible way to look at that, though. Let's click the down arrow and see what it looks like. Yep. Now, if you want to access them this way, that's kind of annoying. You can do it that way, but it's a pain in the butt. So you would do it like this. You can do it that way, right? Or the JavaScript API will actually wrap each of these for you into wonderful little camel case properties as well. So you just remove the dashes and camel case the rest of the letters.
I was doing you. I put you and like this is when I was getting mad.
Yeah, it's not Canadian. It's not a part of the English Commonwealth at all. It's definitely American. All right. Let's start with changing the background color. So, how do I change the background color? What's my syntax look like? Yeah, style me, dot, style, background. Are we going to just leave it at background?
Color.
You're going to add color? I mean, you could, because if you do background equals pink, it will work. That is a CSS thing, but background color is a little more specific. And is it a method? Nope, it's a property. So equals, what color are we going for? Pink. Just the good color, pink. There we go. That's very, very pink. That's like piggy pink.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah. Makes me think of Miss Piggy. All right. Next one. Style me dot. What's this one? Style dot color. Yep. Without a U, right? It's American. No British Commonwealth here, unfortunately. All right. What color are we going for? Pink? Pink on top of pink? Black? All right. I'm going to go black. I mean, it already is black, though. All right. Let's do blue. What was that?
I have font color. Is that
Oh, I totally thought you F-bombed there. All right, style me. Blue on pink. My God, it looks like it definitely looks bootstrappy. All right, let's change the border radius. This is maybe new. I don't know if you guys have ever changed border radiuses before. Style me, dot style, dot border radius. There we go. And why don't we do 15 pixels? It just makes it very round. Makes it pill-shaped.
But would font color be incorrect or is it just?
I don't know. Did font color work?
Font color works for me.
Yeah, then it's accurate. I don't think it's deprecated or anything.
Oh wait, it's still got never mind. Never mind. I don't know color. And on the line then. There we go.
I love that. No, it's like it totally worked. It's like no.
Oh, I know that's the only color
Still
that's,
black,
like,
dude.
Show up with yellow or something, you really tell them.
All right, so the style property, very powerful because now you can dynamically change these elements. And in fact, we do this in our G-Shift platform. So our G-Shift platform, just to give you a brief, quick idea of what it is, it's SEO tools, search engine optimization tools made for marketers, right? And like 90% of the people who use our product are like guys that took a 6-week course on SEO, but whatever, that's not for the here and there. But anyways, some of them want to white label the SEO product so that way when they show their clients, it doesn't look like G-Shift, it looks like them. So what we do is we store things like their text font sizes, their font properties, their colors, their branding images, their logos, and all that stuff. We store all that into a database. And then when we're rendering their reports or rendering their dashboards or their interfaces, we pull in all of their styling properties and restyle the page with their properties dynamically using JavaScript, right? So this is a cool thing. This is common. It's also common, say you wanted to make a video game, right? You can actually use CSS styling properties to be able to style your video game. Swap out sprites, swap out images for backgrounds, create parallax effects, all that dynamically using JavaScript, because JavaScript is a programming language. You can do things like animate. You can animate in CSS, but when you're trying to build a game, you need to pay attention to things like collision detection and stuff like that. You can't do collision detection with CSS. You definitely need JavaScript to do those kind of things, right? So that's those properties. We're not done. Another common thing you want to be able to do with DOM things is move them around. Not animated. This isn't going to be special, unfortunately. Sorry about that. We're literally just going to make it go ping, ping, kind of like a magician, right? Start in the left side, move it over to the right side. That really like, I know. It's hashtag move me. All right. So we're going to move this element from here, and we're going to move them over here, and we're going to use two properties that are available to us on HTML elements called append and prepend. So append, we'll move it to the bottom of whatever it is that you're moving it into and append it onto the bottom of whatever it is. Prepend, we'll put it at the top, right? So move it to the first element of whatever the element is. So if you come down here, I've already started this process for you. If you click execute, you'll notice they are currently in the right-hand side. We want to move them back to the left-hand side. So in order to move them back to the left-hand side, we need to use append and prepend. So if you take a look at my code here, one of the big things that you guys should be doing as programmers is starting to look at other people's code and decipher it, right? Try to figure out what that code is doing. So if we do that, we can see I've created two variables, start and end. I selected two elements on the page, an element that starts with an ID of start and an element with the ID end, right? I've also selected first and second, which are two elements on the page, one with an ID of _1 and one with the ID of _2. And then the next piece I've done, in order to move them, you can see that I've accessed the end element, I've appended the first element onto it, and then I've accessed the end element, prepended the second element onto it. Append and prepend are not properties, they are methods, right? So they accept an argument. So don't use them the same way as you use text content or the styling properties. You're not assigning a value to them, you're passing an argument, right? So go ahead and see if you can figure out how to take first and second and move them back to the other boxes. Should probably take you 4 seconds. Did you say done?
Yes.
As I said, 4 seconds? Nice. Incidentally, you know that thing where you drag and drop the things in line that I got you to order, that list? I made you guys order out the things. It's making heavy use of append and prepend in order to put the things into place. All right, we ready? We're ready? All right. What's my logic?
I don't know.
You said you were done. You lied right to my face. Sorry, what is it?
Start.append first.
Start.append first. Cool. Start.prepend second.
Don't put a pen and prefigure first.
Click execute. Oh, you did it. We're passed. Nice job. Wes. Everything's coming up, Noah. All right.
That'd be a bad TV show.
What, The Simpsons?
No, everything's coming up Noah.
That would be a bad TV show. It sounds like a sitcom title, doesn't it? Oh, I was quoting The Simpsons, but everything's coming up Millhouse.
Oh, right.
All right. Now, I've been talking about Nodeless. You guys haven't been talking about Nodeless. I've been talking about Nodeless. Maybe you guys were talking about Nodeless on the break. I doubt it.
I was about to say that, though.
So, Nodeless, when we use query selector, we get back what kind of object? We get an HTML element, right? When we use query selector, we get an HTML element. When we use query selector all, we get Nodeless. Nodeless, you can think of them like an array that holds a list of HTML elements. Usually, the list of HTML elements are the same kind of HTML element. If you've used query selector all, they definitely will be because you've given a search algorithm. However, that's not the only way you can get them back. There's two ways to access Nodeless. One is using document.querySelectorAll. That will return back a node list. The other is to go through the properties and access children. If you access the child nodes property on an HTML element, it will return back a node list of all of the nested elements inside that child list, which means you'll get back everything, right? So those are the two different ways to actually interact with node lists. So this will return, query selector all will return a node list containing all the nodes that match the past CSS selector using standard iterative structures like for loops, for each, for of, for in, whatever. Not for in, sorry, for of, or just a regular numbered for loop. You can actually iterate through that list and then do something with each of those elements. It's fairly common. So if you just follow along, I've got a quick one here. So we're going to select all of the paragraph tags on the page. So we'll do document, dot, what method am I using? Right, query selector all. Cool. What is my selector? Just P, right? That selects all the paragraph tags on the page. And incidentally, I can do things with this as well that I can do with arrays, some similarities to arrays. I can count this, for example. I can do console.log, ps, right? And how do I count the number of elements in an array? What's the property I use? Yep, dot length. Good memory too, by the way, whoever said that. Click execute, and you can see there are 22 paragraph tags on the page. Okay, so we definitely know we got some, right? All right, step 2. Iterate and change the color of the text in each paragraph to a different color from black. Let's take a vote. How many people want to iterate using a for loop? How many want to iterate using a for each loop? Okay, cool. For each wins. By the way, this is very different. All right, we'll do it both ways. We'll do it both ways. Okay, the first way, we're going to take PS, because that's our node list, and we're going to call for each, which is a method that is attached to node elements as well as, or node lists as well as arrays. This is where things get kind of crazy. For each takes a callback function, which will pass the for each function, the callback function, an argument. And that argument will be the node element, like the list element, the HTML element. My God, how many times can I say things? HTML element. So I'm going to write L in there, just so I can remember. Complete the whole function. Usually this is the syntax structure we use for these. Don't worry, we will write it the other way as well, which is probably a little easier. And then L is literally our HTML element. It's not any of those. It's our HTML element object. We have access to it. So we have access to all those properties we've done before. So how do I change the color of the font on the p tags from black to another color? What do I need to write here? Sorry, L dot style dot American color, like American graffiti, American color, equals, do you think it knows fuchsia? I bet you it doesn't.
Yeah, I was wondering what would it know?
Let's do magenta. Magenta.
Based on the number.
It totally did.
Does it actually?
What color is it? That's right here.
Like I said, we are going to write hundreds of for each, or sorry, we're going to write hundreds of function callbacks. So doing this right now definitely gives experience. This thing inside is just a function definition. That's all it is. It's no difference than passing any kind of value. The cool thing that happens here is for each is actually executing this function. So for each is going to go to the next p tag, execute the function, and pass it in. It's going to go to the next p tag, execute the function, passing that p tag in. And it's going to keep doing that till it gets through the whole list. And then when it's done, it finishes and it exits out. So if we click execute, and we scroll up just a little bit, yep, oh yeah, that's definitely magenta. That's god awful.
I love it.
Oh wow. I think I prefer.
If the color hurts your eyes, you know you got it right.
That's true. Yeah, I think you're right. But I do think I prefer the Miss Piggy Pink over the magenta.
I think someone commented that on one of my PHP teachers said the color hurts your eyes, you know you got it right.
Yeah, Tim. I think it is a color. And it just makes everything invisible,
No way.
which would make the rest of the lecture very difficult. All right. So this is the for each way to do it, right? Kind of hard. That sounded painful.
You can still see.
Let's do the other way to do it. So a for loop, right? Just like we did with arrays, we need to first define a throwaway variable, like a scrap temporary variable that we're not going to keep after this, right? So I'm going to call it L as well. Of what? Yeah, PS. Bzz. No. All right, and now the logic, exactly the same. The logic doesn't change. L.style.color equals, I'm going to go aqua. If you want to go transparent, go transparent. And click execute. And it should override your other one. Yep, that's definitely aqua. And that definitely hurts your eyes. Incidentally, I don't know if you know this, but pink, aqua, magenta, black, white, all of those colors that you use as the labels are implemented differently in each browser. They are not necessarily the same tone or shade as they are in another browser. So what Chrome thinks magenta is, Firefox may not think it's the same thing and change the color spectrum. That's why if you want the most accurate color you can get to, use the hexadecimals, use RGBA, use HSL, use one of those methods to do it. Don't type pink. Because you'll definitely get a different type of pink. All right. So there we go. We did two loops. Basically result in the same kind of operation, right? One takes a callback. One is a little clearer to understand. And we're almost at the end of this whole thing. And maybe this is a bit mean. But I've got a crazy, crazy, crazy little last closing out task for us to do. This is going to be fun. We're gonna do something very, very crazy because I mean we've been playing with objects, and I told you guys I think last week these things like style, right? The DOM creates this style, right? That's its object. It created it. That doesn't mean that we're not allowed to touch it. We can change it. We can modify what it does. We can also change the HTML element that returns back and modify what it does. We can modify what a node list does. We can modify anything we want. If we want to add a method or a property to an existing object, what do we add it to? So you got to roll back to last week. We talked about when we want to add new properties or methods to an existing object that will carry down to children. What property do we have to add it to on that object? Exactly, to the proto object or prototype. We've accepted either or. So we can actually take advantage of that and create our own methods. Now, node lists operate similarly to an array. However, they are not an array, right? So they don't get some of the other array methods. For example, node lists don't have access to filter or map or reduce, which are really cool, helpful things. For example, filter allows us to actually return based on a condition, right? So we can go through a list of items and say, return this only if it meets this condition, right? Filter's pretty powerful, but you don't get filter on HTML elements. You have no access to filter on HTML elements. But that's not entirely true, because we can write our own filter method and make it function exactly the same as it would function on an array element on the node list, if we so choose, okay? So, first thing we're going to have to do is select all our LIs, and then I wrote this cool little filter here, right? But if I hit execute, what does it return? Gives an error. What's the error? It's a type error. Lis.filter is not a function, meaning the filter function is not available on those lis element. What is lis? What kind of object is lis? It's a node list, right? It's a node list. So what it's basically saying is filter is not a function on node list. You don't have access to that. So there's a few things what we can do. So first thing we're going to do, we're just going to comment this out. Right? So write a /* in front of lis and a * at the end of the semicolon so it gets commented out. We're going to make filter work by using a cool ES6 feature called array.from. What array.from is, it will take a list, it doesn't care what the list is, and it will convert it into an array. And now we have an array that we can go ahead and filter, okay? So all we do is go array.from, pass in our node list. That is now an array. If you want, you can assign it to a new variable, but I mean, we're using JavaScript and we have something called chaining, right? Chaining, basically the way it works is array from lis will return an array. So we can take that array, we're going to press dot. What that tells the interpreter is it says, take this thing, take its returned value and pass it to whatever is being chained on next. So we're going to say array.from lis filter. So now that array is getting passed to filter. Filter takes one of those nasty callback functions that you guys so love to write, right? So we're going to do function L like so. Okay. And here's how filter works. You make a comparison, whatever it is, and you return either true or false. Okay? If you return true, that element will get added to the array, whatever the array happens to be. If you return false, it will discard that element and move on to the next element. That's essentially how it works. Yes, Tim?
Why do you have the extra bracket?
Extra bracket where? Here? Because I opened it here. So I have to close it here. This function L is an anonymous function. We're passing it as a value into our parameters. All right. So we can create a filter. You know what? We won't do that though. We'll just console it log it out. Console log L. That'll actually console log out the element to the console log, and we should be able to see all of them. Wow, that was annoying. Sorry about that. Why does the page jump so drastically when I adjust the side? There we go. So if you click execute and it worked, you should see a bunch of li elements on the right-hand side pop out. There's some downfalls to this. Array.from returns an array, okay? Not a node list. So I lose any node list functionality that I had originally. It's now gone. So anything that I was originally a part of the node list, any properties or methods that are a part of a node list object, I no longer have access to, because what I've done here is converted my node list to an array. So now I have array properties and array methods, right? That, from a programming perspective, is not a good paradigm. When you pass something in, your return should likely be the same thing you passed in. You should get back out what you put in. Whatever the object was that you put in should be the object that gets returned. Okay? That's a better paradigm. So if I pass a node list in, I should sure as hell get a node list back out. That's what should happen, not an array. But this situation is going to produce an array, and that's what I'm going to get back, which sucks. So what do? As a JavaScript programmer, I know that I have power over my JavaScript API. I control everything to do with it. I can manipulate it and change it, including create new methods if I so choose to, which is exactly what we're going to do. We're going to create a new filter method on the JavaScript API, on the node list object, and make it able to actually filter code for us. Pretty cool, eh? So here's how we do it. There's a big laundry list of things we have to do. We're going to do it quickly. All right, step 2. Create a filter method polyfill on the node list object. Okay, well we know that in order to do that, we need node list. We need the object that we're going to start with, right? Node list is an object that's already a part of the API. We need the prototype. The reason why we need the prototype is because when we create this filter, we want it to be applicable to any children that have been created using the node list. So we have to access it on prototype so that it immediately gets passed on to any child. And then we're going to call it filter because that's the name of the method. Equals function. Right? Now, filter on arrays, what does it take as an argument? It's only the argument it can take. It's a callback, right? It takes the callback function. We can't get away from that. We have to do the same thing because we're building something that's supposed to emulate or polyfill the same thing that the array is capable of. So we need to do the same process. So because the arrays take a callback, we need to take a callback. The cool thing about that is the callback function is just a value. That's all it is. All we need is a parameter. Just a parameter to store that value in. We're just going to call it callback. You don't have to call it callback. You can call it frank. It doesn't really matter. It's just a parameter. Okay? Did you call it frank? Why
No,
not?
I asked what we call it. Is it callable on that? No,
All right. This code will only create, this next little chunk of code we're going to create is going to create something called a document fragment. We're going to look more into that when we get back from the break after the midterm, when we actually start to create DOM elements. Because you didn't know that, but you can create DOM elements. You can create brand new elements and shove them anywhere in the DOM that you want. Style them however you want. That's how things like, I don't know, when you go to like forms and that, and all of a sudden this little code block appears at the bottom, that's usually how they do it. They create a new DOM element, and they shove it down at the bottom with your personal information in it. Those are all being done using DOM create. We're going to create a fragment. What a fragment basically is, it's a DOM element that is not currently in the DOM page. It's not visible to the user. It's just sitting, floating around in existence around the DOM. It's like a toddler. It's just playing around the other toddlers. Okay? That's basically what the DOM fragment is going to do. But we need one because we need to be able to access a property on it so that we can return a node list at the end. So we're going to do const let's just call it frag equals, I totally forget. Sorry, give me 1 second. I completely forgot what that syntax looks like. I'm going to cheat. Oh, sorry, it's in this one. Oh, I called it a node list, actually. Yep, there we go. I got it now. Sorry, let's change this to node list. Makes more sense. List. Make it let, not const. Document. Dot create. I think it's create document fragment. Yeah, it's create document fragment. I don't think it gets past any arguments. No, it's just by itself. All right. So that's going to create a document fragment, which, like I said, is just, it's no different than any tag you would create. It's literally, it doesn't have a tag, though. That's the only thing. It's not like a body, a div, or a paragraph, or anything. It's just, it's an HTML element. It just exists. Okay? All right. Next, we're going to create a for loop that iterates over this. So, node list, remember this. This is always a reference to what? Close, yeah. The owner object, right? So this, in this scenario, will reference node list. Okay? Here's where I break your brain. Allies is a node list. When I call .filter on it, right? What is the context of this? Allies. It's the allies. So this is the allies, which means I can iterate through them, just like I can iterate through anything, right? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to iterate through them. I mean, this is super stellar kind of like next level kind of shit. All right. Let node of this, because remember, this is those LIs. It is that node list. First, we want to check if the callback is returning false, because filter will not return any values that are false. Okay, how did I do that? Oh, right, that makes sense. So the first thing we're going to do is if callback equals, oh, yeah, no, sorry, I got witty. Yeah, I did it shorthand. Yeah. So I use the not operator. There's two ways you can do that. The benefit of using it this way, though, is callback can return undefined, can return null, can return false. So it can return any of those three values, and all three of those values are technically falsy. However, if you do callback node equals false, and it returns undefined, that is not true. If it returns null, that is not true. If it returns false, that is true. This shorthand statement basically says, if callback node returns false, null, or undefined, all three of those are considered false. That's basically what it means. Okay? I know you're not any clearer than when I started that sentence. All right, let's write our little thing. And we need the next thing. So call continue to perform the next operation. Sure enough. So basically, if it's false, we want to skip. And the reason why we're skipping is because, like I said, you only return the node back if it is true. So if you return true, you'll return the node back. If it's false, then you want to skip to the next node. That's basically the way it works. You don't want to return that node back. You're going to discard it. Hence filtering, right? We're filtering through the nodes. That's essentially what's happening there. All right, so we can go ahead and add in this thing. Else, yeah, there we go. Otherwise, append the node to the document. So to do that, we're going to go node list dot append, right? And we're going to add our node to it. Node. And it's going to become a child of node list. After you do that, you want to close that out. And then I think we're basically done that operation. Yep. All right. I'm going to scroll down just a little bit so you can see the whole for loop, because I know some of you are probably a little bit behind. So I'll let you just look at the for loop. By the way, this is not going to be on a midterm. It's not going to be on a test. I'm not going to ask you to prototype your own filter method or anything like that. But I want to show you the power of JavaScript. All right, cool. So let's scroll down here. Now we have the last part. Return the child nodes of the document fragment. We're doing this because we shouldn't change what object went in. We called filter on a node list. We need to ensure we're returning a node list, right? We're modifying a node list. We want to return the node list. So we're going to say return node list dot child nodes. And what that's going to do is it's actually going to return the child nodes on our document fragment. Our function's going to exit, and our document fragment's going to get discarded. This is what happens. Yep. We just use it and abuse it, and then cast it away.
Such a harsh word, discard.
Just call it an Uber and send it on its way. All right, click execute. If everything is good, we should get no errors. I got no errors. So we should be fine. Now the cool thing is, this li's filter that we earlier commented out, we should be able to uncomment it. And it should work. And just to make our lives a little easier, why don't we comment out this one. Comment out lines 11 to 13, right? So that way we can see that this thing is actually working. And click execute, and if it works, you should see all of your LIs in the list on the right.
Just comment out mine.
There you go. You should have 3 LIs altogether on the right-hand side.
What if I have 7?
Then it didn't work.
An error.
If you get an error, then you're missing code. All right. Just to make life a little simpler, I'm going to copy this. Just so it's easier to see what we did. There you go. That's what the function looks like in its entirety. So just double check and make sure yours matches up. And once you take the comments out, it's kind of a lot simpler looking. So just to quickly run through what's happening. NodeList.prototype.filter, we're adding a filter method to NodeList as a prototype. Because it's on the prototype, any child that was created using NodeList or that inherits from NodeList will immediately get access to this function. Okay? That's the first thing. Next thing, we're making it equal to a function. Essentially, we're making it a method, right? We're going to take one argument, and we're calling it callback. Now, you don't necessarily need to pass a callback function, but if you don't, because we are attempting to call the callback here, it will cause the method to blow up. And we'll say that this is not a function, right? We should handle that with a throwing an error in there, but we're not going to. We're just going to do this. All right? The next step is we create a document fragment. A document fragment is essentially an HTML element just floating around in outer space, doesn't have any actual connection to anybody, okay? We just create this because we're literally going to use it and then throw it away when we're done, because all we need it for is to be able to create a child nodes list, which is essentially a node list. Then we iterate through this. This is in reference to the node list, okay? So, for example, this LIs up here is a node list. When we call filter, it is this. It's literally that context of this, right? So, in that scenario, this is equal to LIs, right? Just like we were able to iterate through the paragraphs before, we can iterate through this because it is a node list, okay? So we're iterating through the node list, and we're casting each element to node. Then we check and to do a callback with node, which if it returns false, then we reject it. If it's good, we append it to our list. When we're done, we return the whole node list back. That's it in a nutshell. Just out of curiosity, how many people actually get what it's doing? Cool. Cool beans. I would recommend taking a look over it because if you do grasp what it's doing, it will definitely help you become a better JavaScript programmer. You can do this in other languages as well. Some languages support overriding. This is essentially overriding. You can kind of take the same type of paradigm and transfer it to another language. All right. Go ahead, click Get Your Code. It spits it out. Copy and paste that in the written submission. Just a note, if your code is not functioning, that is fine. You're getting the marks for submitting it. Okay? Don't tell the bastards that don't show up. You get the marks for submitting the code. Cool? Cool. All right. Let's talk about quickly. Like I said, this class is probably going to go all the way to 9. It's just how it works. Let's talk about the midterm practice test. All right. Cool. If you give me your attention, and I'll try to make this quick and sweet, and we'll get out of here in by 8:40 by the latest. All right. So this is the midterm practice test. You can find this at Module 7. The link is under Week 6. Okay. So if you go to Blackboard, and you're like, where did he put that thing? Go to Weekly Learning. Go to Week 6, and you'll see the midterm practice is sitting there under Week 6. Okay? This practice, if you click the link, opens up the midterm practice, and this works the same way as any of our labs has worked. Okay? So open up your console window, because your console window is going to give you feedback. It's going to return information about what's going on. All right. Gentlemen, please. Incidentally, this thing does randomize. So if you look right now, see the scores? See the first score starts with 21,252? No, it doesn't, does it? If you hit refresh, that will change. It will change until you hit execute for the first time. The second you hit execute, those will lock. Okay? So if I hit execute now, bam, and I hit refresh, the first score was 18,302, still 18,302, okay? They will land lock. Go through and answer step 1. Correct the following code so the syntax error disappears. So if you click execute, you should see a syntax error. Sure enough, uncaught reference error, who's it, is not defined. I'll give you a few seconds. See if you can figure out how to fix that syntax error. You will have to type code in order to fix that error. I mean, what's the easiest way to fix that syntax error?
Make a variable.
Exactly. Make it defined. That's the easiest way to fix that syntax error, is take this thing that is undefined and make it defined. So, let who's it equal 5. I mean, it doesn't really matter, does it? Cool. That worked. That who's it error went away. We have a new error. Step 2. Using the appropriate keyword to create a breakpoint, record in the variable below the value of sum. Remember, what breakpoint? How do we create breakpoints? What's the keyword we need to use to create a breakpoint? Debugger, exactly. So go ahead, try writing debugger. Write debugger. Find out what the value of sum is, and then record it into sum total. So I'm going to write debugger here. Debugger. Execute. Sure enough, there comes my debugger. I'm going to go to the console, which is glitching out for some bizarre reason. There we go. I'm going to type in sum. And my sum is 544,640. I'm going to hit play. Go here, click equals, paste that in place, hit execute, hit play, and I've passed. Okay? If you want to clear that window so that you get a whole new list of stuff, if you go to application, I may change this. I may create a clear button for you. But go to application, click on local storage, click on the thing, and then just hit clear. Don't hit clear all, actually. Hold on. Go. Oh, no, yeah, so anything that says M7, that starts with M7, go ahead and delete those. You just click on them, hit delete, and you refresh, and you'll get a whole new, brand new set of numbers. I think, you know what, just for less confusion, stay out of that window and I'll create a clear button for you, and I'll deploy it tomorrow so that it'll clear the local storage for you. All right, cool. So if you move on to the next one, now you have variables, right? These ones, I always put these on the test. There's never a time I do not put these on the test. And I'll tell you right now, every year, same thing. I don't know why. I don't know why this is even a thing. I tell people, scope the variable, make it functionally scoped. So what do? So say this is your variable, right? Make this functionally scoped. Okay. How many people think that's what I mean? Awesome. What should I have done? Not let. Not const. Bar. I mean, in the end, you got there, right? Bar.
So far as, constant is functionally scoped. It's not.
It's block scoped. That's the difference. Bar is functionally scoped. Functionally scoped meaning it is only scoped within a function. If you put var in an if condition, it is not scoped. It is accessible outside of the if condition. It is accessible outside of a for loop. It's accessible outside of a while loop. If you define it in a switch, you can still access it outside. That's why it's considered functionally scoped. Okay? Block scoped, which is let and const, they're only accessible within the set of the curly braces. Doesn't matter what the structure is, if it's got a set of curly braces, it's scoped within inside there. Okay? That's the difference between those two. So go ahead. There's 4 of them there. Feel free to answer them. There's also a bonus and a secret bonus in there that you will discover if you choose the right value. Ooh. Incidentally, that also wants you to practice data types, right? So make sure you put the other data types. If it's Boolean, it's true or false. Yeah.
Well, your secret value, is it like to get the secret question, is it a true or false value or a number value, like to get it?
I'm not telling you.
Oh. Wow.
Let's put it this way. It's not a trick.
Okay.
So it's not like if you use 0 for the Boolean value, you get this bonus. It's nothing like that. It's an actual legit value. All right, conditional statements. Obviously, I want conditionals. There's a few different types here. First ones are changing these. So you have to actually modify the code, right? So that the following will be true. Now, my logic in the back end monitors these values, right? And it will in the real test as well. So scrapping this and writing true in there will equal out to a wrong answer, just so you're aware, okay? Because syntax is important. So don't just think you're going to be smart and change that out to true and then pass it through and think it'll pass, because it won't. The syntax reader in the back does a regex expression check to make sure the values stay the way they are, okay? Because there's no reason to change the values. You only need to change the operators to make the thing true, okay? Same with this one, change the operators. This one, you have to do casting, okay? You can use either of the 2 casting methods, string or number, but you have to use casting to make that one true. All right. Even though it's already true, technically. It still evaluates to false because of the non-casting. The next one is an if, else. You're going to write that based on the logic that's there. These are common in midterms as well, and I find that these tend to catch people up. There's a bit of logic here, so you will have to solve the logic. It's super, super simple logic, but you will have to solve a bit of logic there. So if the cost is greater than 50, set haggle to 0.3. Else, if the cost is greater than 30, set haggle to 0.2. Otherwise, set haggle to 0.1. And you just write that if condition. Just do yourself a favor. Don't write the if condition between each of the steps because it will cause a syntax error. It is better for you just to write the if condition on a blank line underneath. Write the whole thing in, okay? Switches.
Yes,
Again.
Question you would give right switch. So looking for an if.
If you write a switch in the if block, you will get it wrong. Yeah. So again, there's regular expression in the background that's running on this to check if it's an actual if condition. Okay. And I'm completely transparent about that. I won't be transparent on the test, for obvious reasons. It'll be handled by a server. But in this, I'm completely transparent. You're welcome to go see how I modify and how I evaluate those and what regular expression is used if you want to take a look at it. I mean, you can't game it anyways, but you can go take a look because it might help you answer what I'm looking for, all right? Or even better, just Slack me and I'll help you, okay? Switch statement in here, right? Basically, you're checking service. I think this one actually generates a new one each time. Yep, see? Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's stellar. Fantastic, right? So they modify. Again, once you click execute, it snaps it, right? But like I'll create a clear button so that you can override it. Arrays, creating arrays, right? This one took quite a bit of effort, and I think this is where I ended. Nope, not quite. This one took a lot of effort to write because I wanted to make it open enough that you guys were able to just do it, right? So create a single-dimensional array with 3 elements. Create a multi-dimensional array with 2 nested array elements. Make sure you follow what it says, okay? Because if you create a multi-dimensional array with 2 nested array elements, but you don't make them arrays, you make them something else, it will blow up. If you make it with 3 elements, it will blow up because I didn't ask for 3 elements. I asked for 2 elements. So make sure you do the exact number of elements. The test might be a little bit more liberal on that. I'm hoping to make it more liberal, but if it isn't, please follow the instructions as exactly as they're written, okay, to avoid any issues and having to contest grades and things. This one here, accessing array elements. I generate a random 3 numbers for you using array indices. Indices or indexes, however you want to pronounce them, indices. Access and store the value 279 in the following variable. What would be my answer? What's that? So it'd be equal to single R, index, this is 11, index 2, right? In order to access that one. Maybe we'll do that one together, just because making me nervous. All right, so equal, single R, and I want to access 279, so it's 2. Because indexes start at what number? Right, exactly. So 0 would be 283, 123, 279. All right, let's do the second one together. Using array indices, access and store the value 123 in the following variable. So equals single R.
Something like that. Around the 1, somewhere 2 is 0.
I mean, you literally encompassed every answer. Cool. And then the last one will be equal to single R, and very likely 0, I think. Yep, 0. The multi-array one. Okay, so the one on the test will not be this hard. It'll be much simpler. But this one is super difficult to make it, it's kind of like learning to drive a Mack truck in order to drive a little Smart 42, right? You start with a big thing and it's much easier to deal with the smaller ones. Take it slow, right, and figure it out. The easiest way to do these that I find, and I tell this to students all the time, I don't know why nobody thinks about this, copy it, paste it, and then start trying shit out, right? So multi-R, okay, let's start with 1. Okay, 1 turns back those 3 arrays. Is the value I'm looking for in those 3 arrays? No. Let me check this one. No, it's not. So because it's not, then I'll move on and try another index. And then I slowly work it down until I get all the numbers I need and find the element I'm looking for. Does that make sense? That's the easiest way to solve those questions. Copy, paste in a console, work it down, answer your questions, and then that'll be it. So on the test, there'll likely be 2 of those. It'll be the same array, but there'll be 2 questions, finding 2 spots of it. So lots of practice there. Adding, removing elements, very simple, just follow the steps. This generates 5 names, 5 random names. I mean, some of them are from the Archies, some of them are from Flintstones, some of them are you guys, just random. Okay, and the ones that aren't done, functions are not completed, and obviously I'm going to get that completed this week so that you have them, because I know functions are a difficult one. Custom functions, objects, both literals and constructors, and inheritance. So inheritance, guys, inheritance will definitely be on the test, okay? So if you are struggling with inheritance, make sure you have that indexed, you have that note favorited. That would be module 5 of last week. Make sure you've favorited that page, right? The inheritance question will look very much like the code you wrote on that page. That's the big hint.
What happens when I copy and paste that code with comments and everything?
If you copy and paste the code with comments and it doesn't match up to what I'm looking for, it'll be wrong. Yeah. Because
Some of them aren't done, like the object literals are not done yet in the code, correct?
what's that?
Like so,
Are those not?
they're like empty.
Yeah, because they're not done yet. So I'll push those this week. So if you subscribe to my GitHub, you'll get a notification when they're pushed. Yeah. Incidentally, that's also a way to get a jump start because I always push all of the code for the modules on Sunday, which means you can start a day ahead and see what's coming up for class. I don't know if you guys know Rick Berta, but that's what he does to see whether or not he should show up or not. So he just checks my Sunday code and says, nope, that's nothing new for me, and doesn't come. And then there'll be DOM stuff, accessing an HTML element, and working with node lists. And that's it. And then you can submit it if you want me to see what you've done, or if you need any help, you're welcome to submit it. I'll create a little submission link, but there's no marks for it. So I take that back. I'll give you 1%. I'll give you a mark. I'll give you 1%. All right? Cool. Okay. It's 8:44 and I'm tired. Yes, Tim? Tom? You? What's your name? I can't believe I'm forgetting.
Nick.
Nick. Why did I call you Tim? All right, Nick. What's up?
Where do we submit the lab?
It should be there.
No, the submission.
It's 6.
Why does it say Lab 5? Hold on. Don't get nervous. Technical difficulties. All right. It should be under labs and it should be there. Yeah, it should be there. It was called Lab 5. Spelling error. Mistake. Technical difficulties. Now it says Lab 6. Cool. So remember,